everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of The County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We are bringing you the show from the Southern Utah University's annual Rural Summit, which has provided a lot of great guests for us over the last 6 years. Today joining us is Ben Winchester, who is a rural sociologist. Now, this is a title I had never heard of before, Ben. And you are the Senior Research Fellow at the University of Minnesota's Extension Center for Community Vitality.
That's right.
So you get everybody doing calisthenics in small towns? Is that how that works?
Our communities are quite vital.
Okay. So explain to me exactly what a rural sociologist does. From looking at what I've been able to read, you're kind of a numbers guy.
Yeah, I am, and that's not always true of sociologists, I would say. I'm a quantitative rural sociologist, and I use a lot of sociological theory to help understand some of the changes that have occurred across our specifically rural communities that we've seen in terms of how people are connected, what they do for employment, and how those structures impact everyday community and social life that we've got across our rural landscape. And I've been lucky and fortunate enough to get an education in a program specific to rural sociology, and that was at the University of Missouri. And following that, I went to work at the University of Minnesota at a new outreach unit called the Center for Small Towns. And I was there for a number of years, tromping around rural Minnesota, learning about what's going on and how people are talking about our towns and what we can do to help them progress into the future. And then probably 8 years ago or so, I moved over to Extension, which I think a lot of people know who Extension is the 4-H people and the ag people. But specifically in Minnesota, we've got a new sliver of Extension called Community Vitality, the Center for Community Vitality. And it's within that we do economic development, community development, and leadership and civic engagement programming.
Explain to me the rural nature of Minnesota. I mean, we all know about, Minneapolis. For us in the West, that's about as far as we go with Minnesota. How much of it you consider urban is a ratio and rural?
4 to 1 metro. So in terms of population, if you look at land area, it's another story. Land area might be about 35% urban and 65% rural. So, but even within Minnesota, we've got the Minneapolis-St. Paul metropolitan area, which is now quite large, and even encompasses areas of St. Cloud across an interstate corridor, and then down to Rochester, which is the home of Mayo Clinic. So we do have, I would say, a number of metropolitan areas across the state as well.
So looking at it number-wise, you're actually almost identical to Utah because we have basically a huge metro center, Salt Lake, Ogden, Provo, and the very southwest corner of the state with St. George has kind of blossomed into a metropolitan area.
That's right. When I first started running the numbers, I looked at, there were a lot of similarities and a lot of differences. For example, you've got the third highest growth rate in the country between 2000 and 2010. You've witnessed some extraordinary population growth across the state as a whole, and at the same time, like Minnesota, we've got high amenity areas just like you do here. Minnesota, we almost have 3 Minnesotas. We've got the southeastern part of the state, which is rolling hills and bluffs. We've got the western part of the state, which adheres more to the prairie territory, and then the northern part of the state, which is more pines territory and mining operations up there.
Wow. Well, I think there's a good start. Over your career in Minnesota and where you started, what's been the biggest single surprise to you as you've done this data and research? What was the biggest myth buster that you think your career-wise has encountered?
Boy, I think everything I do is myth busting right now. It's not everybody locks their doors. Not everybody knows everybody in town. There is just so many. Not everybody is flocking to the city. There are just so many things that you hear about in the narrative about what's going on in our rural communities. I found the data just didn't support it anymore. And I think the premise of my whole argument that I gave here today even is that the narrative we're using to describe our rural communities is straight out of 1950. And we really haven't done a good job understanding some of the trends that have been happening since then.
So our narrative has been in rerun syndication for like 50 years.
That's right. You can literally copy and paste, if our grocery store closes, our small town is going to die. If our hardware store closes, our small town is going to die. If our school closes, our small town is going to die. So we've had a lot of issues in our past.
Excellent. Well, this is a great place for us to launch from. We're going to take a break here on the County Seat. We'll be right back with Ben Winchester after this break.
There is a place where looking out means looking in, where an impression lasting only a few seconds will be imprinted on a life forever, where courage is forged and innocence rediscovered. where remembering is rewarding and forgetting unforgettable. There is a place where truth is felt and where seeing is believing. There is a place.
Color. It's something that can be seen. But have you ever wanted to reach out and touch it? Experience it. In San Juan County, Utah, color comes to life like nowhere else on earth. Color can be more than an abstract. Color can be your gateway to a new world. Visit San Juan County and explore the past, present, and future in a way that you've only dreamed of. San Juan County. Color your experience.
Let's be honest, you don't know much about Beaver County. Well, let me tell you about it. It's the birthplace of outlaw Butch Cassidy and inventor Philo T. Farnsworth. Some of the best skiing in Utah is at Eagle Point. You've got camping, Canyon Breeze Golf Course, Crusher and the Tushers, Beaver Territorial Courthouse, snowmobiling, renewable energy, Pioneer Car Show, Squeaky Cheese, ghost towns to explore, best water in the country, Paiute ATV trails, Old Frisco Kilns, horse races, hunting, fishing, and it's a good place to live. Beaver County, mountains of fun. I could tell you more, but why don't you come and see it for yourself?
All local products have a story of magical places, real people, and delicious recipes spanning generations. So go ahead and discover flavors you've never tasted and friends you never knew you had. Utah's own Discover Local Food.
Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking with Ben Winchester from the University of Minnesota Extension Service, who is uniquely qualified as a rural sociologist with a lot of statistical research to back him up. So you, in your presentation today and in the title, you talked about rural Utah, the brain gain. What exactly is a brain gain?
Sure. I think a lot of the narrative about rural has been dominated by the deficits. It's what we don't have, what we wish we had, what we used to have.
Out-migration of our youth.
At the same time, we've got a lot of books and literature that cover all of these kind of negative and deficit aspects of our small towns. And I didn't want that narrative to continue to infect my mind in terms of what I saw, because what I was seeing every day didn't match up to the narrative. And so as a good data guy, I went back to the data, I started looking at the numbers, and one of the first things that hit me was that the rural population in the US hasn't been going down, it's been going up. And it's been going up pretty consistently since 1970. In fact, the rural population in the US has gone up by 11% since 1970. It hasn't gone down, but the relative percentage of people living in rural areas has gone down. And that's because the urban growth rate is around 50%.
So what you're saying is the storytellers of our community are looking at the cliff notes without really looking at the detail of what's actually going on.
That's right, and there's a lot of nuance to the numbers too. I mean, we put a lot of stock in our population, the signs we put outside of town. And if the population sign goes up, we're winning. If it goes down, we're losing. And that there's actually some nuance within that. So I started to break apart by age categories, and we know a lot about the brain drain, right? And that's our high school kids that want to leave after graduation.
Or feel they have to.
Or feel they have to, or are told they need to. And we do see 40 to 60% of all 18-year-olds migrate away from their home counties. This is not an exception, that is the rule. And there are very few counties that actually are net importers of that age demographic. But at the same time we're losing those people, I started to see increases in 30, 40, 50, and 60-year-olds into our rural communities, and many of those people are also bringing their kids. So while we're not necessarily having our children in our rural communities, we're bringing them in to our rural communities when they're in 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. So on one hand, we're losing our high school educated children, and they've got, or young adults, and they've got their high school degree, they may not have much work experience, and on the other hand, we've got people moving back to our rural communities who are bringing their families, they've got work experience, job experience, they're buying homes. So I just wanted to offset the language a little bit to say, rather than calling our towns brain drain towns, maybe this is a brain gain for our rural communities.
Do you think part of this is emotional? I mean, you always want your kids to grow up, and if you're really a close family, you want them to buy the house next door and be there forever. Is part of this narrative emotionally driven?
In some ways, but in some ways it harkens back to the whole history of our rural communities is one based on outmigration. We had a large outmigration, the early 1900s especially. When we mechanized agriculture across this country, the number of farm workers was reduced by anywhere between 20 to 60%. So we started to see a large outmigration of people, and I think we're used to telling the outmigration story. We're used to giving reasons why people are leaving, and trying to find ways to plug that gap. When the migration people, now just to put this into a little bit of context here, international migration theorists, when they talk about brain drain, that's losing your top engineers, your top scientists. And if I were to show up at a international migration conference and say, yeah, you know, here in the US, we've got this brain drain where we're losing our high school kids. And they're like, oh, you're losing your high school kids. We just lost all of our top engineers and doctors. So on one side, we need to be careful about the language we use. Because when we talk about our towns in these negative terms, everybody hears it. Potential residents hear it, our kids hear it, our local leaders hear it. And if we don't have good ammunition for what is really going on the positive side, we're going to think that narrative is continuing and that we have no control over it.
We're going to take a break on the county seat. We'll be right back in just a minute.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
When the road takes you farther than you knew possible, when the world is more beautiful than you've ever seen, when home is more comfortable than it should be, this is when you know you're in Kane County. The perfect mix of rural and urban, culture and adventure. Glendale, Orderville, Kanab, Bigwater, small towns with more to offer than just peace and quiet. Kane County, Utah. Find the new you.
Shopping in Davis County has never been better. Experience Station Park, Northern Utah's premier gathering place for shopping, dining, and entertainment. With over 100 shops, Station Park is something for the whole family. Or explore the shopping possibilities this season under one roof at the Layton Hills Mall. Both are conveniently located north of downtown Salt Lake, just off I-15. Come take advantage of special discounts and a wide selection of stores. Visit playindavis.com for more info.
Welcome back to the county seat. Our guest today is Ben Winchester, the rifleman, so to speak, from Minnesota. We were talking before the last break about the brain gain, where there's actually more and more experienced people moving into towns than moving out. So I kind of left it at a cliffhanger. Let's go ahead and follow that up.
Sure. So ultimately, if you only look at total population figures, there's that nuance again behind it. So even in communities, for example, that lose people overall, that loss isn't everyone leaving. The loss is generally dominated by the loss of the high school graduates. And maybe some seniors too. But ultimately, you've got these age groups of 30 to 49, they're moving in and they're bringing their kids. So initially, I called my colleague Randy Cantrell at the University of Nebraska and was like, Randy, you won't believe this. You know, the western panhandle of Nebraska, where you're experiencing 10 to 20% population declines, you've got 30 to 49-year-olds moving in. He's like, I cannot believe this. So we ultimately did a number of focus groups, surveys, and started to talk to hundreds and thousands of newcomers to these rural communities, and we asked them, why did you move there? And the top three reasons that people gave were slower pace of life, safety and security, which is especially true with people with kids, and the low cost of housing. And we also asked people like, do you have kids? And we thought that number would be, of the newcomer households, we thought 75% of them were going to have children, but just 50% of the newcomer household had kids. And at the same time, we also thought these newcomers were going to be mostly kids that had grown up there, moved away, and were coming back home. And in fact, we found that just a third of the newcomers had any previous regular residential contact with that community. So there were things like, I used to go to Bible camp up at Alexandria. I really like that region. Or I like the local foods community here. So there were all these varied reasons that people gave why they made the move. So it really is, for us, quality of life. Quality of life, and it was really, we heard a lot of messages about life on my time. People wanted control over their time again. And this included things like former urbanites that got sick of the commute, got sick of the rat race, and they wanted to move out to a more rural environment. And when you actually look back a number of decades now at how even urban areas have grown up, they haven't grown taller, they've grown wider. And they've grown wider because people wanted that less dense environment to raise their families in. And then so many people make the move out to our rural communities that they become urbanized. So in many ways, some of our more rural communities have become so popular, they become what they may not have wanted to be.
So they didn't run far enough away. Is that what you're
And they've some of those suburbs have really grown out to a great extent.
And I grew up myself in that exact environment. We moved out of the city when I was a small kid, and the city caught up with us. We just didn't go far enough away. So I kind of understand it. You know, as you're talking about the urbanite who moves to that slower lifestyle, for some reason, Oliver Wendell Douglas in Green Acres came to mind.
Yeah, it does.
So, how do communities, you know, how has the behavior become different in the communities? Because you still go on Main Street in these towns, in the grocery store, like you said, in the hardware store, they're boarded up.
Yep.
So while people may be moving in, business isn't in some of those towns anymore. So how did that happen? What's going on there?
Sure. I think we've had a much more diversified economy in our rural counties since really in the 1970s. We've had this actual migration of people 30 to 49 into our rural communities since the 1970s. So they've been coming in, and I would argue that these cohort growths have led to a diversification of our rural economy. So no longer are we so dependent upon a single industry or a single business in our rural communities. We're much more diversified, and I would say thankfully so. Just as much as I don't want my 401k all in Microsoft, I would like to have that diversified out. So have our rural communities diversified their economy.
So what happened to the local grocery store? Why did it go away? Because obviously there are people capable of running the grocery store, and they're coming back to town or moving into town. What happened?
Yeah, and I think towns beat themselves up a lot when you've got major institutions that were there for a number of years close up. So hardware stores, grocery stores, and when they close, it has a very distinct effect and a negative effect upon the residents there. They take it personally that they lost their grocery store. But I'll tell you, there's grocery stores and hardware stores that close in your suburbs too. But you don't hear about it because you've got 4 or 5 other options there. The reason why we see a lot of this economic restructuring is due to globalization. It's not due to people in that town just not shopping there. We've got all of these dynamics that are at work at once, and it's no one event that causes something to happen. But as jobs migrate to regional centers, or people take on different types of jobs, that they may be telecommuting, or they may be sole proprietors and working in a region, and then they happen to be in one town and do shopping there or whatnot, that this has changed dramatically. And I mean, even the interstate highway transportation system didn't come in until 1957. I mean, the impact that transportation and communication networks have had on our rural communities cannot be stated highly enough. It impacts how towns connect to themselves and how towns connect to each other.
So basically the transportation system took away some of the traditional structure because it became much easier to drive from Panguitch to Richfield than it used to be because the highways are better.
You bet.
But that also means that the guy who works in Richfield has an easier time getting back to making the commute back to Panguitch to live.
Yeah, and we see that. We know we've got bedroom communities all over the place right now. This isn't Little House on the Prairie when you live and work and shop and play in your one town. I don't know of any towns that are so isolated that they exist unto themselves, unless you were to head up to Alaska, possibly. But ultimately, today, what we have found consistently is that people live in a region, and we call it living in the middle of everywhere. That you may live in one place, you may work in another, your spouse may work in yet another. You shop and eat out within a 30-mile radius of your house, and you play within a 2-hour radius of your house. So I lived in a small town called Hancock for almost 12 years, and they had Buddy's Bar and Grill. And I didn't want to eat out at Buddy's every time we went out. We wanted to go and taste the flavor of the region. So I think the idea here is that no town is a one-stop shop, and it hasn't been for quite a long time now. And that we've diversified, we've been part of this diversification of rural communities that has impacted many of the structures that we thought were never going to leave. But at the same time, people are moving to our rural communities. They're moving there today for what you are. People don't care what you had. People don't care what you may have had or the decisions you didn't make 15 years ago that people still like to talk about. People are moving there for what you are today, not what you were.
So how does a county or a community structure itself to take advantage of that and come to that self-realization and improve their overall tax-based community or services by that growth of new population coming in with families? How do they foster that in-migration to increase?
Yeah, I think it's a real important question here because for me it comes down to the narrative and it comes down to how do you talk about your town. Now if you've got a negative narrative about your town, about what you don't have and what you used to have, I don't know many people that are going to be really attracted to that. But if you talk about, our town has Buddy's and we've got La Cocina up in Morris you can go out to eat at, or you've got some really great businesses in the region that you can hit on. It's about approaching people on their terms. And instead of seeing people as a warm body to move into your town, that they're more than warm bodies. They're actually people with their families and people that may have an interest in going hunting or fishing or hiking or four-wheeling and finding out what are they interested in, what community is going to be a good match for them. And you'll find, you'd like to think that there were only some towns that benefited from this brain game, but it was everywhere. It was literally everywhere. Even in counties that are experiencing 20% population decline, that mostly is driven by the loss of the kids and the loss of the seniors, but you're bringing in people 30 to 49 with their kids.
Excellent. Boy, it raises more questions than there are answers. So because there are more questions, I've got a few more for you right after this commercial break. We'll be right back on the County Seat.
What would you do with an extra day in Utah Valley? Explore the Wasatch Mountains? Snap a family photo at Bridal Veil Falls. Cool off on Utah Lake or the Provo River. No matter what you're searching for, you can find it in Utah Valley. Bring everyone together.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
The Utah Farm Bureau has always been there to fight for the needs of its members. With discount programs on items ranging from vehicles and ATVs to health and wellness. The membership fees aren't big, but the results are. We've been around since 1916, and we're not leaving anytime soon. Utah Farm Bureau. We work for those who work to feed the world.
You power America, and America empowers you. Help ensure the future of oil and coal. If you have a stake in Utah's coal and oil industry, join us for the 6th Annual Uinta Basin Energy Summit, August 31st through September 1st. Visit co.uinta.ut.us to register today.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We are having a conversation with Ben Winchester today. you mentioned something before. I get why the high school kids are leaving. You know, they want to spread their own wings. They want to go away to college. They want to get as far away from home as they can, just like my kids did in the city. They wanted to go away to school. So I get that. Why do seniors leave?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different residential location decisions that get made when you are thinking about retiring. It's, do I want to move closer to my grandkids? Do I want to move closer to my kids? I want to move to a house that has less maintenance. I don't want this 3,000 square foot, 3-story with
10
steps
acre.
that needs high maintenance if I'm going to leave and visit family for 3 weeks. You know, so what are the opportunities for people to move? And I call it moving in, moving out, and moving over. Do you have legitimate opportunities for your seniors to move over in your community, or are they just going to end up moving out? Now, there are some points that you don't have control over. If you're a senior that's got high medical needs or need to visit a clinic pretty regularly, then obviously if your community does not have that, which a majority of our rural communities do not, that's mostly in the regional centers, then you're probably going to lose those folks. But ultimately, when you see the losses there, you've also got people who want to stay. It's just that they may not have appropriate housing in that community for them.
Oh, that's a good thing for community planners to be thinking about.
That's right, especially given the fact that about 75% of homes in our rural communities are owned right now by baby boomers and older.
Okay, so what did we not talk about that we should?
Well, I think just to reaffirm the point that newcomers are moving to your communities today for what you are. And I think there's a lot of times a lack of respect for these newcomers because, you know, they weren't born there, they weren't raised there for some reason.
We don't know the history.
Yeah, we don't know who their parents are, you know. But at the same time, these people have made the move. Newcomers take a tremendous risk when you make the move. Think about every time you've made a move and how the butterflies flutter when you're in the U-Haul driving to your new community and you're wondering if this is really going to work out or how it's going to work or how the kids are going to do. Did I just make a mistake? I mean, all of those. But meanwhile, we've seen this happen over and over again. People have been making the jump, taking the risk to move into our rural communities, to start businesses, to take on jobs, to bring jobs with them, to outsource jobs to rural communities in many ways, and to really, I would say, reinvigorate our social aspects of communities too. Because these people are involved, as a result of our research, we found that these newcomers also are involved socially at rates much higher than the resident population. They spend more money, they volunteer more hours, and they lead more groups, but they're almost unseen. Because, you know, generally the people who are new to town are involved in different types of groups than the people who lived in town for 40 years. So there's a lot of variability and diversity in our rural communities.
You have a lot of information. It says Minnesota on your title. Is there a way people in county management out here can get some assistance from your center?
You bet. I'd be more than happy to help. We've got custom data profiles that can be made for communities or different counties. I do mostly county level data. But you could visit. We've got a lot of research on our brain gain, which is at z, as in Zulu.umn, University of Minnesota.edu/brain gain. And my email is benw@umn.edu.
Ben, thank you for joining us. Thank you for inviting us up into your home. Remember, local government is where your life happens. Be engaged, be involved. We'll see you next week on the County Seat. If you'd like to share this video with your friends, well, you do that right here. If you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, you do that over here. If you'd like to interact with us on the County Seat, that happens over here. If you want to watch the next episode of the County Seat, you can catch it Saturday night at 11 or Sunday morning at 8:30 on ABC4 Good for Utah.